She clocked in for what should have been an ordinary Tuesday shift at a welding shop in rural Minnesota. By the end of that day, 20-year-old Amber Mary Czech would be found dead on the floor of her workplace, her skull shattered by repeated blows from a sledgehammer wielded by the man working just feet away from her. The weapon was still at the scene. So is he. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe so you never miss stories like this. November 11th, 2025, Cokato, Minnesota. A small town where everyone knows everyone. Where violence like this does not happen. Where a young woman should be able to show up to work, do her job, and go home safely at the end of the day. But Amber Czech never made it home. And the person accused of taking her life was not a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was her coworker. Someone she saw every single day. Someone she worked alongside in the confined, loud, metal-scented air of a welding facility. Someone who, according to investigators, had been harboring something dark and volatile beneath the surface. David Bruce Delong, 51 years old. A welder, a man who had worked in that shop long enough to be familiar. Long enough to be trusted. Long enough to know Amber's routines, her workspace, her vulnerabilities. And on that November day, something inside him allegedly snapped. Or perhaps it had been building for weeks, months. Perhaps the rage had been simmering quietly, invisibly waiting for the right moment to erupt. Perhaps Amber never saw it coming. Or perhaps she did, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The details that have emerged from the investigation paint a picture that is as chilling as it is tragic. This was not a random act of violence. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was not an accident. According to prosecutors, this was intentional, deliberate, personal, the kind of violence that speaks to something deeper than a momentary loss of control. The kind of violence that raises questions about what was really happening in that workplace. What had been said? What had been felt? What had been ignored? Amber Czech was 20 years old. She was a welder in a field dominated by men. She showed up every day to do hard, physical, skilled labor in an environment where women are still the minority. Where the culture can be rough. Where the jokes can be crude. Where standing your ground as a young woman requires a certain kind of toughness, and Amber had that toughness. She was there to work, to earn a living, to build a future. She was not there to be harassed. She was not there to be the target of someone's obsession or resentment or rage. But according to the criminal complaint and statements from investigators, David Delong had developed what can only be described as hostility toward Amber. Not professional disagreement, not workplace friction, hostility, the kind that festers, the kind that turns a coworker into a threat, the kind that, in hindsight, should have been a warning sign. But how often do we recognize those signs before it is too late? How often do we dismiss tension as personality conflict? How often do we tell women to just deal with it, to not make waves, to keep their heads down and do their jobs? Would you have noticed the warning signs? Would you have said something if a coworker seemed fixated on someone in a way that felt off? Or would you have assumed it was none of your business? The morning of November 11th began like any other. Amber arrived at work. She put on her protective gear. She fired up her equipment. She was doing what she had been trained to do. What she was paid to do, what she had every right to do without fear. But somewhere in that building, David Delong was also preparing. Not for work, for something else. Something he had allegedly been planning. Something that would end with Amber's life being taken in the most brutal way imaginable. A sledgehammer, not a gun. Not a knife. A sledgehammer, a tool of construction. A tool meant to break through concrete and metal. A tool that requires force, intention, repeated blows. This was not a weapon of convenience. This was a weapon of rage. Of overkill. Of someone who wanted to destroy. And that is exactly what happened. Amber was beaten. Repeatedly. With enough force to cause catastrophic head trauma. Enough force to ensure she would not survive. Enough force to suggest that this was not just about killing her. This was about obliterating her. When her body was discovered, the scene was described by investigators as deeply disturbing. The violence was extreme. The brutality was undeniable. And David Delong was still there. He did not run. He did not try to hide. He was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. He was charged with second-degree intentional murder. But prosecutors have indicated they may pursue first-degree premeditated murder charges. Because the evidence, they say, suggests this was not a spontaneous act. This was planned. This was thought out. This was murder. What goes through someone's mind in the moments before they decide to take another person's life? What internal narrative justifies picking up a sledgehammer and using it to end someone's existence? What kind of rage, what kind of entitlement, what kind of psychological fracture allows someone to believe that another human being deserves to die because of something they said, something they did, or something they refused to do? David Delong's motive, according to investigators, was rooted in hostility toward Amber. But what does that mean? Was it rejection? Was it resentment over her presence in a space he believed belonged to men? Was it anger over something she said or did not say? Was it a perceived slight that grew in his mind until it became something monstrous? We may never fully understand the internal logic of someone who commits an act like this. But we can understand the pattern. Because this is not an isolated incident. This is part of a larger, darker reality. Women in male-dominated industries face harassment, intimidation, and violence at rates that are both underreported and underaddressed. The welding industry, construction, manufacturing, trades of all kinds, these are fields where women are still fighting for respect, where they are still proving themselves in ways their male counterparts never have to, where they are still subjected to comments, jokes, and behaviors that create hostile environments. And sometimes that hostility turns deadly. Amber Czech was not the first woman to be killed by a male coworker. She will not be the last. But her death has sparked a conversation that is long overdue about workplace safety, about gender-based violence, about the ways in which women are targeted, not because of what they do, but because of who they are, about the ways in which rage against women is normalized, minimized, and ignored until it explodes into something irreversible. Do you think workplaces do enough to protect women from harassment and violence? Or do you think the culture in male-dominated industries makes it easier for dangerous behavior to go unchecked? The community of Cokato is small. Fewer than 3,000 people. The kind of place where a murder like this sends shockwaves through every household. Where people knew Amber, where people knew David, where the question on everyone's mind is the same. How did this happen? How did no one see this coming? How did a young woman go to work and never come home? Amber's family is devastated. Her friends are in shock. Her coworkers are grappling with the reality that someone they worked alongside every day was capable of something so horrific. And the questions keep coming. Were there signs? Were there complaints? Was there a history of inappropriate behavior? Was there tension that management knew about but failed to address? These are the questions that investigators are asking. These are the questions that the public is demanding answers to. Because if there were warning signs, if there were red flags, if there were moments when someone could have intervened and did not, then this is not just a story about one man's violence. This is a story about systemic failure, about the ways in which institutions fail to protect the people who are most vulnerable, about the ways in which women's concerns are dismissed until it is too late. David Delong is being held in custody. He has been charged. He will face trial. But no amount of justice will bring Amber Czech back. No conviction will undo the trauma inflicted on her family, her friends, her community. No sentence will erase the fact that a 20-year-old woman with her whole life ahead of her was murdered in a place where she should have been safe. The psychological profile of someone who commits workplace violence is complex. But there are patterns: isolation, resentment, a sense of grievance, a belief that they have been wronged, a fixation on a particular person or group, an inability to regulate emotion, a history of conflict, and often a triggering event, something that, in their mind, justifies the violence, something that gives them permission to act on the rage they have been carrying. In cases of gender-based workplace violence, the triggering event is often tied to rejection or perceived disrespect. A woman who refuses advances, a woman who asserts herself, a woman who simply exists in a space where a man believes she does not belong. And the violence that follows is not just about anger. It is about power. It is about control. It is about punishing someone for daring to challenge the status quo. Would you have trusted David Delong if you worked with him? Would you have felt safe around him? Or would something about his behavior have set off alarm bells? The sledgehammer. Let us return to that for a moment, because the choice of weapon matters. A sledgehammer is not subtle. It is not quick. It is not clean. It is a tool of destruction. And using it to kill someone requires sustained effort. It requires commitment. It requires a level of rage that is almost incomprehensible. This was not a crime of passion in the sense of a momentary loss of control. This was a crime of sustained, deliberate violence. This was someone who wanted to make sure Amber Czech was dead, who wanted to make sure there was no chance of survival, who wanted to inflict maximum damage. The autopsy report, when it is released, will likely detail the extent of Amber's injuries, the number of blows, the severity of the trauma, the suffering she endured in her final moments, and those details will be difficult to read. They will be difficult to process, because they will force us to confront the reality of what happened to her, the reality of what one human being is capable of doing to another. But we must confront it, because ignoring it, minimizing it, or turning away from it does nothing to prevent it from happening again. We must look at the ugliness. We must sit with the discomfort. We must ask the hard questions. Why did this happen? What could have been done to prevent it? What systems failed? What cultural norms allowed this to occur? And what are we going to do differently moving forward? The legal proceedings will unfold over the coming months. David Delong will have his day in court. The evidence will be presented. Witnesses will testify. The prosecution will argue that this was premeditated murder. The defense will present their case, and a jury will decide. But regardless of the outcome, the damage has been done. A life has been taken. A family has been shattered. A community has been traumatized. And the broader conversation about workplace violence, about gender-based violence, about the safety of women in male-dominated industries, will continue. Because it has to. Because Amber Czech deserves more than to be a statistic. She deserves to be remembered. She deserves to have her story told, and she deserves for her death to mean something. To spark change. To force accountability. To make workplaces safer for the women who come after her. The psychological impact of workplace violence extends far beyond the immediate victim. Coworkers who witness the aftermath will carry that trauma with them. They will struggle with guilt, with fear, with the knowledge that they were feet away when it happened. They will question whether they could have done something, whether they missed something, whether they are safe. And that psychological toll is real. It is lasting. It is something that will require support, therapy, and time to process. The family of Amber Czech will never be the same. They will never get to see her graduate, get married, have children, grow old. They will never get to hear her laugh again, hug her again, tell her they love her again. They will carry the weight of her absence for the rest of their lives. And they will carry the knowledge of how she died, the brutality of it, the senselessness of it, the injustice of it. Do you think the justice system does enough to hold perpetrators of workplace violence accountable? Or do you think there are gaps that allow dangerous individuals to slip through the cracks? The investigation into Amber's death is ongoing. Detectives are interviewing coworkers, reviewing security footage, examining communications, and building a timeline of events leading up to the murder. They are looking for evidence of premeditation, evidence of motive, evidence that will support the most serious charges possible. Because this was not just a workplace dispute that got out of hand. This was, according to all available evidence, a calculated act of violence. And that is what makes it so terrifying. Because if David Delong planned this, if he thought about it, if he prepared for it, then that means he was walking around that workplace interacting with people, going through the motions of normalcy, all while carrying the intention to kill. That means Amber was working alongside someone who had already decided she was going to die. That means every interaction they had in the days and weeks leading up to her murder was shadowed by his hidden intent. How do you protect yourself from someone like that? How do you recognize danger when it is hiding behind a familiar face? How do you trust your instincts when the person who wants to harm you is someone you see every day? Someone who seems normal, someone who blends in. These are the questions that haunt survivors of workplace violence. These are the questions that keep people up at night. These are the questions that have no easy answers. The broader issue of toxic masculinity and entitlement in male-dominated workspaces cannot be ignored in this case. The idea that a man could feel so threatened, so enraged, so entitled to control or punish a female coworker that he would resort to murder speaks to a cultural problem that goes far beyond one individual. It speaks to the ways in which women are devalued, objectified, and seen as less than. It speaks to the ways in which male rage is excused, minimized, and even celebrated in certain contexts. It speaks to the ways in which violence against women is treated as inevitable rather than preventable. Amber Czech went to work to do a job. She was a skilled welder. She was contributing to her community. She was earning a living. She was doing everything right. And she was killed for it, not because she did anything wrong, but because someone decided she did not deserve to be there. Someone decided she was a problem. Someone decided she needed to be eliminated. That is the reality of gender-based violence. It is not about what the victim did or did not do. It is about the perpetrator's belief that they have the right to control, punish, or destroy someone simply because of their gender. It is about power. It is about entitlement. It is about a worldview that sees women as objects, rather than people. The trial, when it comes, will be closely watched, not just by the people of Cokato, but by people across the country who are tired of seeing women killed by men who feel entitled to their bodies, their attention, their submission, or their silence. People who are demanding accountability. People who are demanding change. People who are saying enough is enough. But trials take time. Justice, if it comes, will not be swift. And in the meantime, Amber's family will grieve. Her friends will mourn. Her community will struggle to make sense of the senseless. And other women in other workplaces will continue to show up, continue to do their jobs, continue to navigate environments where they are not always safe, not always respected, not always valued. What would you do if you were in Amber's position? If you felt uncomfortable around a coworker but did not have concrete evidence of a threat, would you report it? Would you stay silent? Would you quit? These are impossible questions. Because the burden should not be on the victim to predict violence. The burden should not be on women to protect themselves from men who want to harm them. The burden should be on institutions to create safe environments. The burden should be on society to address the root causes of gender-based violence. The burden should be on all of us to recognize the warning signs, to take threats seriously, to intervene before it is too late. Amber Czech should be alive. She should be welding. She should be living her life. She should be making plans for the future. She should be safe. But she is not. Because someone decided she did not deserve to be. Because someone decided their rage was more important than her life. Because someone decided that violence was an acceptable response to whatever grievance they were carrying, and now she is gone. And we are left with the aftermath, with the questions, with the grief, with the anger, with the demand for justice, with the hope that her death will not be in vain, that it will spark change, that it will force conversations, that it will save lives. The psychological terror of this case is not in the gore. It is in the proximity. It is in the familiarity. It is in the fact that the person who killed Amber was someone she knew, someone she worked with, someone who was part of her daily routine. It is in the realization that danger does not always announce itself, that violence does not always come from strangers, that the person who wants to harm you might be standing right next to you, and you might never know until it is too late. That is the nightmare. That is the unease. That is the cold realism of workplace violence. It is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It is mundane. It is ordinary. It is a Tuesday morning in a small town in Minnesota. It is clocking in for a shift. It is doing your job. It is existing in a space where you should be safe. And then, suddenly you are not. David Delong will face the consequences of his actions. He will be prosecuted. He will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. But that does not undo what he did. That does not bring Amber back. That does not erase the trauma. That does not answer the question of why. Why did he do it? What was he thinking? What did he believe gave him the right? We may never fully understand. Because the mind of someone who commits an act like this is not rational. It is not logical. It is not something that can be easily explained or understood. It is broken. It is dangerous. It is capable of unspeakable violence. And that is terrifying. Because it means that no matter how much we try to make sense of it, no matter how much we try to find patterns or warning signs or explanations, there will always be an element of unpredictability. There will always be a risk. There will always be a chance that someone, somewhere, will decide that another person's life is worth less than their rage. But we cannot let that paralyze us. We cannot let that stop us from demanding better. From demanding safer workplaces. From demanding accountability. From demanding a culture that does not tolerate violence against women. From demanding a world where Amber Czech's story is an anomaly rather than a pattern. She was 20 years old. She was a welder. She was a daughter, a friend, a coworker, a human being with dreams and plans and a future. And she was taken from this world in the most brutal way imaginable, by someone who had no right, by someone who will now face justice, by someone whose actions have left a scar on a community, a family, and a nation. Amber Czech deserved better. She deserved to be safe. She deserved to live. She deserved to be valued and respected and protected. And the fact that she was not is a failure of systems, a failure of culture, a failure of humanity. Her story is not over. It will continue in the courtroom. It will continue in the conversations it sparks. It will continue in the changes it inspires. It will continue in the memories of those who loved her. And it will continue as a reminder. A reminder that workplace violence is real. That gender-based violence is real. That the threat is not always external. That danger can come from the person standing right next to you. And that is the most disturbing truth of all. Do you feel safe at your workplace? Do you trust the people around you? Or is there a part of you that wonders, that worries, that knows that safety is never guaranteed? Because after what happened to Amber Czech, that question is harder to answer than it should be.